Alright, so as you can see behind me, we're out in the machine area right now. So first step to these prototype bushings is we got to machine them out based on the CAD information we came up with in the last episode. So we're going to rough out some test samples, not worried about cosmetics too much, just making sure the OD is right, it's got the right taper, everything looks perfect, and then we'll worry about making a production version. So we're going to start by cutting out the larger rear bushing, check them out, and then we'll move on to the next two. Alright, so this is our OG SL20 lathe. If we're doing like quick prototypes and stuff, we're typically going to do it in this. When the part moves to production, we'll run them in our DS30, which is the big lathe over here. Allows us to do lights out, a little more automation to it with the bar feeder, so we can get a lot more done. Basically, you just load this thing up with rods, and it keeps loading them in as it goes. Using these big bars here. All right, so we got this prototype version, so I'm just checking real quick. I want to see the fit. It's based off all the measurements we got, but it's always a good idea to just check how it actually fits in the car. So I'm not going to press it all the way in, but just want to see. Yeah, so it gets past, there's a taper, which kind of helps it get started, and then it gets tight. So something we could probably drive in. All right, back to the machine. These aren't production models, but at least you can see we did on this one. So these are all blanks. They're definitely going to be anodized and probably laser etched. Might go with like a black anodize on these, but. All right, so we got the big rear ones done, the dual hole one. We actually had to put it in the mill, cut the two holes. In production, we probably cut it on a DS30 behind us because we've got live tooling. We can mill in a turning operation. But either way, for the quick prototypes, we don't want to spend a lot of time setting up any kind of production sort of machining. So we just do it kind of quick and easy. Not worried about saving a lot of time per part until we run into get it to production level. So we're going to move on to the smaller front ones. There's a thin wafer piece, about ½ inch roughly, that takes up the void on the bottom and allows you to use factory hardware. And then the bigger one that does the important part is up top. It's kind of like a upside down top hat sort of. Gets pressed into the rear and does all the locating and mounting of the rear itself and setting it at the right height so your pinion angles don't change, which is important. You know, buying these cheap Chinese knockoff stuff out there, you got to watch, because the accuracy and what they're doing, you might put your pinion angle wrong, and pinion angles are important for U-joint life on your drive shaft and just making sure everything's in alignment. And we based everything off of like a factory specification, so just to make sure that you don't have any of those problems. But it's time to start cutting them out, and then we're going to move on to test fitting everything once that's done. So these are the front bushings, so this presses in, and then there's another piece to this that we're actually machining right now, which is the last piece. So should have that wrapped up hopefully today, and we can start pressing these in and doing the final checks on everything. But these turned out pretty cool. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's got the 8.6 logo on it. Not sure if we're gonna end up doing that, because these also will fit like an IS300. So but it turned out pretty cool. Here's the last piece of the puzzle. This is the other half of the front diff bushing. I'm running these out right now in the old DS30. All right, so all the bushings are cut. It's time to go put them in the FRS and again test them. These aren't going to stand there. Once these are all approved, dimensions are right, everything fits right, then we'll move into making an actual production piece. All right, so this represents the final dimensions. Again, aesthetically, this isn't really a finished part, but it's got the right taper on it. So if you look inside here, there's a pretty short flange, probably 3/8 of an inch. So has a taper for easy start, then it bottoms out on this back of this flange and sits right on that flat surface, which is the right OD. So try to make these so they install pretty easy, but we should be able to set it in there and then drive it home. Voila. Pretty simple install, but rock solid. It's not going to move, it's not going to vibrate. Exactly what we're looking for. Move on to this next one. We're going to do a little cleanup in here just to knock some of the scaling, the rust off, just to make sure we're getting a good smooth surface as it would be. Got a little beat up on the other side from getting the old bushing out, so just make sure you're not working with some jagged, sharp edges that are going to dig into that aluminum while you're doing the install. All right, so you can see we got all the sharp edges off. We're not trying to take metal off unless it's sticking up from the surface, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to make that hole much larger than you're going to make the bushing fit not correctly. Now again, we're just test fitting these completely to make sure that these diameters are right. This isn't a production part. Normally you would install the rear and then use the factory bolts and nuts to draw this in because it's got an alignment to it. So if you just bang this in here and it's a little bit off, it's going to make a giant pain in the butt to install the rear. It's not possible, and to rotate this after it's installed would be next to impossible. So again, we're just checking the fit. I'm going to knock these all back out once I'm done, but normally you would have the rear, and when I do the final bushings, I'll show you like an installation guide on how to do it. But for now, we're just going to set this in here and bang it in and make sure we like the fit of it. See if we can get it back out. Much easier to remove than the stock ones, thank God. All right, yeah, that's a really nice fit. It's nice and tight, but you don't have to kill it to get it in there. Well, going in the touch crooked on that one, but it's called install error. There you go. Nice solid sound. So yeah, we're bottomed out, nice and tight. All right, so now that we got those main bushings in, these are actually, this is the top side over here, so that's actually what sets the height in relation to the subframe for your pinion height. But these are basically spacers that go on the bottom that fill this void and just make it the OEM length so the factory hardware works. These install pretty easy. Just pop in there like that. If for some reason you're fighting it, it's probably something's deformed on your rear from taking it apart, but they pop right in. Now this thing's good to go, ready to put up in the car to do the final test fit. All right, so the final tolerances, everything check out on these. So the whole point of this is to just make sure we got these sizes right. Yes, we have CAD data, but again, it more comes down to installation, and it doesn't necessarily behave the same as a steel part would or the factory one. So just because we can measure the size of the factory stuff, it's always, we found best to test fit these. Well, the design is based to, normally your factory bolt is used with this rubber washer. This is designed to not use the rubber washer, so you don't need them, but you will use all the factory hardware. So this bolt will go in there like that and put it up against the subframe. So time to get that in there and then final check everything with it installed fully in place. I'm gonna leave them a little bit loose for now. I want to get these other back ones started first. So like I said before, we're gonna use these bolts to help us draw it in. Just gonna get them started. And it's time to do yourself a favor and just take your damn sway bar off too. I don't know why I haven't done it. It's only 4 12mm bolts, but it would definitely save you a little headache. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So I got these finger tight started, so we're gonna do a combination of tapping and impact on the way in. And there we have it. It's all tightened up. And the rear is in position, so everything looks good, nice and snug. Definitely not going to be any movement whatsoever with this rear end, so I think we accomplished what we set out to. So last step is going to be making these into a production version, and then we'll do a final install with the actual parts, and then these test pieces will come out. All right, so these are the production bushings, freshly back from anodizing. So we want a black hard coat. Next step is we need to laser etch these. So we run this Epilog Fusion Pro. It's a dual source laser, does fiber and CO2. So it gives us a lot of options. We can pretty much etch anything. So we can nest these bushings out inside the laser here, and then load the program from the computer and get the etching going. All right, so here's the before and after with the laser etch. So now these bad boys are ready to install in the FRS for the final time, thank God. This is how the fronts turned out. So like I said, these actually come in from the top like this and get sandwiched between the car and the rear itself. So these locate the front of the pinion in the exact spot it needs to be. Turned out pretty good. All right, so let's get these bushings out of the box. When you get the kit from SIKKY, this is essentially what it's going to look like. This is the complete diff bushing kit, FRS, BRZ, and IS300. There we got the front bottom side spacers, sticker, front upper bushings, and then the rear driver's side, or left if you're right-hand drive guys, and the right side. So that's what they look like. And since it uses all the factory hardware, there are no bolts or hardware to go with this. All right, so first step of doing the installation is we're gonna put these upper bushings in that go, and there's no orientation or anything on these. They literally can go in whichever way you want. If you want to be super anal, you can adjust the logos to be in any direction you want. But basically set in there. These are a simple press fit. You're not going to be killing them, but you just want to make sure it's seated in there. If for some reason you got a lot of gunk in your, I wouldn't go too crazy sanding this out because these are a couple thousandths fit. So worst case, yours is a little tight, you can put these in the freezer and it'll make it a lot easier. But basically repeat that step on both sides, and we're going to move on to getting this put up into the car, and I'll show you the other two steps. So, all right, so I recommend, if you're not doing this to the ground, obviously get some help with this part. But so obviously we haven't put the bottom side of these washers on, so I'm going to get it up closer, and And then we got to put the spacers on that allow you to use the stock hardware. All right, so you get it snug so it'll move around a little bit. Then we're going to take these spacers, the factory hardware, and just find the hole up in there. And these will kind of like press in so you know you're in the right spot. If they're not sitting down there, you might need to tap them in a little bit, but just don't want to get the hardware on there all crooked and have it bind up. All right, so these we're gonna leave finger tight too till we get the back ones in. That way it can move around a little bit. All right, well, let me get the So yeah, there's gonna be a lot of movement. This is the way these subframes are designed, where these front bolts go in, the nut actually floats, which is why I'm saying we don't wanna get these real tight yet, because we want this rear to be able to move. So as long as you can have it move, that when we line up these back bushings next, you'll see we draw them in with the hardware. All right, so now that we have the back supported, the fronts are installed but still a little bit loose, you're gonna take the next one, and you're probably gonna have to raise or lower this till you get it to the right height. But basically, we're just gonna line this up. So it's important to leave those front bolts loose just so you have some wiggle room back here till everything gets aligned. So it's not gonna get real crazy with tightening anything down yet. All right, now we're gonna move on to putting the double one in. All right, so we're gonna use these bolts to draw the bushing in, the combination of hitting it with a hammer. If it gets hung up anywhere. All right, so when it's all the way tight, you're still gonna have a little bit of a gap on the back side here because the way this is flanged, it's actually sitting off of the subframe a little bit. But the main thing to look at is you have no gap in here behind where the rear connects to the back side of this bushing, then you know it's installed all the way. All right, we can tighten these down now. And that's it, installation complete. Not terrible. Not the easiest job there is out there, so having the right tools help. All right, so all the bushings are installed. Now you just gotta go back and do the reverse of pulling the axles and loosen the suspension, put everything back together. All right, so now we gotta do the reverse. I'm taking all this out. We're gonna push the suspension out, get a little bit of slack in here, guide the front of this axle back into the rear. Oh, easier said than done.
Respond to that.
Thanks, Siri. All right, so it's tight. All right, there we go. Sometimes you got to give it a smack to get that snap ring past pop in. Oh, I know what the problem is. Control arm's holding us up here, so make sure you get that in. Actually, we can get those bolts put through as well while we're at it. There we go. Popped in, and you can hear that clip seat, so we're good to go now. Start putting the hardware back in. This lower control arm where it goes through the knuckle. Start by putting this lower control arm bolt through here. All right, so you can use a pull jack here. Raise this up. Whoops. Line the shock. And then put the hardware through. And get the nut on here. Lastly, we're gonna raise this up a little bit, swing this out, and get the last bolt through. Very last step, we'll put the sway bar back on once we get the other wheel back into position. All right, we can crank all these down now. All right, so this last one you're gonna wanna leave loose on the shock, because what happens is you tighten that down, it pinches this control arm a little bit, it makes the end link for the sway bar hard to get in there, so we'll come around and tighten that last when we do the bottom of the sway bar end link. So we're gonna jump to the other side. I'm not gonna bother showing you that, and then we'll come back to this and putting the sway bar in. All right, so now we got the other side installed, and we're doing the final step of getting the sway bar bolted back up here. So just make sure you get your end links kind of in the control arm and ready to go before you start bolting this up, because they're not, once you get that up, you're not going to be able to swing the bar up, it'll hit the control arm. All right, we just got to tighten these down. All right, and then we're gonna line up the end of the sway bar end link, factory bolts back in. We're going to tighten up the shock. And that's it. All right, so that's a wrap for this episode of the FRS build. We're going to dive into some new stuff after this. Glad to get this one done and off the plate. As obviously I didn't show up, make sure you put fluid in your rear. And if you'd like to get a set of these bushings for your FRS BRZ or IS300, they are up on SIKKY.com. I'll put a link in the description. And we're also going to be putting out a step-by-step install guide just specifically on these bushings, so it won't be mixed in with this series. So check out our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.